All right, Peter, thank
Okay.
you so much for jumping on this.
No problems.
Been looking forward to chatting with you for a while. I was just having a look on your bio on your website. There's quite a lot of letters after your name, Peter.
Yeah, well, you can buy a few of those. They're all right. That was for a long time ago, Scott. A long time ago.
Well,
Anyway.
well, it's quite impressive. But I'd like to chat to you initially about your career, because you've had quite, further to my point about the letters after your name, you've had a pretty outstanding, illustrious career. So can we trace back a little bit as to where that all started?
Yep. Well, I guess if we go right back, sport's always been my main passion. Okay, so when I was a kid, I'd either be playing sport or watching sport or reading about sport and like that. So then, what I really wanted to do when I left school was to become a sports commentator. Really, I want to be Bruce McAvaney or someone like that. But my mother convinced me that I should do medicine, and so I did a medical degree. But still very involved in sport, playing a lot of sport. I ran the football club at university, and I'm still involved there 50 years later, and that sort of stuff. So went up to England, practiced in the Poms for a while, to spend most of my time watching sport, and then came back. And the original plan was to sort of do general practice with an interest in sports medicine, but then over a period of time, that sort of evolved into full-time sports medicine, and we set up a sports medicine clinic here in Melbourne, still going strong. And I got involved with a number of different teams, initially with AFL teams and then some national sort of sporting teams, Olympics, Commonwealth Games, all that sort of stuff. And at the same time, got very involved in sort of developing sports medicine as a profession. And we created a medical specialty out of sports medicine, which hadn't been done before. Started from scratch, and it took us about 15 years to become fully recognised as a medical specialty, the same as everything else. So that was a passion of mine. Then got a bit involved with the academic side of things, doing some research and writing. I'd always liked writing. And pretty early on in my sports medicine career, I got approached by a publisher to write a textbook of sports medicine. I'd written some article somewhere they'd seen, and they thought, and at the time I thought, I'm way too junior and inexperienced to do that. And then my colleagues reminded me that I'd basically bagged the hell out of every other sports medicine text that I'd written, and so I said, okay, I'll give it a crack, and took a year off really, and wrote this textbook, and that's become a really big thing. It's now in its 5th edition, and we've sold probably 200,000 copies or something. It's basically the Bible of sports medicine around the world. And initially it was just 2 of us writing it with some colleagues, and now it's a whole bunch of people around the world contributing.
Around the world, not just
No. It's the biggest selling sports medicine book pretty much everywhere. So that's been good.
So if it's on its 5th edition, so each revision, is there a need to kind of tweak and take into consideration new sort of innovation or research?
Oh yeah, a lot of different. Yeah, we do it about every 5 years or so, and it's amazing the amount of new information, because it's a new area, sports medicine, and there's a lot happening. And the first edition we'd probably have about 2 or 3 references at the end of every chapter. Now we've got 200 at the end of every chapter. So it gives you an idea of the sort of explosion in knowledge and research and so on. So it's getting that balance between the research, but also what's practical and how you actually do it. So So that's been good. What else? I worked with, as I said, a bunch of national sporting teams. Did athletics for a long time with some Olympic Games and so on. And then I got into soccer.
Is it always performance-based, Peter? Like how to recover?
Yeah, well, it's performance-based, but it's also medical, injury-based and so on. So, sports medicine is sort of a broad church, really. It's traditionally been mainly sort of injuries and preventing injuries and treating injuries, managing injuries. But now we've sort of launched out more into promoting exercise and so on. And performance, yeah, is a big side of it. We work with the sports scientists as well and so on. But I've largely been a clinician, just seeing athletes and helping athletes that are great and small along their way. And then I took a bit of a break after the Sydney Olympics as the kids were growing up, and I wanted to spend more time at home. And then got back into Socceroos 2007. Did a 4-year World Cup cycle with them. Went to the World Cup in South Africa with them, and then got approached to go to Liverpool in the Premier League. So literally the day after we finished the Socceroos World Cup in South Africa in 2010, I was on a plane to Liverpool the next day. So that was a fascinating experience in the Premier League. It's a very different world over there. Actually, not as advanced and professional at that time as you would have expected, and not compared to AFL or NRL, well behind in the sports medicine, sports science world. But,
really,
I think they've caught up. They're caught up now. But so that was a great experience. Loved living in Liverpool. Loved the whole environment, and any city that has two passions of football and the Beatles can't be a bad city. So that was good fun. And then it's funny how sort of things. My main sport as a kid was cricket, and I just never sort of had an opportunity to work with cricket. I just I sort of figured, oh, that's right. Cricket passed me by. Other people were doing it. And,
cricket a sport, Peter? Is cricket a sport?
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very. That's a very rude thing to say, Scott. So anyway, I got a call to just do one cricket tour because they were short. And anyway, I'd finish up into a 5 years of cricket, which traveling around the world and 51 tests in a row and so on. So that was a fantastic experience. World Cup and so on. I finished that 3 years ago now, before they had their little indiscretion in South Africa. So clearly they were missing my moral guidance there. And then I guess, which is probably why I'm here talking to you, over the last 8 years now, my emphasis has really changed from my passion for sports medicine and injuries and so on into an interest in nutrition. And that's been a really big change for me. I've sort of run the two lives in parallel, if you like, my real job and my passion for nutrition. And that's another story. But that's what I've been doing of late.
And what was the genesis for that focus on nutrition? Because rightly or wrongly, doctors generally get a bad sort of reputation as to their focus on nutrition. So I'm kind of interested as to how that came about.
Yeah, well, I'd been a bit interested in nutrition from a performance point of view, but it had become pretty boring. It was all just about carbs and pasta parties the night before the marathon and Gatorade and Powerade, and that was it. So I'd sort of lost a bit of interest in that. So I was back in 2012. I was in Liverpool, and at the time, if you'd sort of asked me, how was I? How was my health? I'd have said, I'm fine. I just turned 60. I was hadn't had significant illnesses, didn't take any medication. I was pretty good. The reality was I probably wasn't quite as healthy as I thought I was. For a start, I had a family history of type 2 diabetes. So my dad had developed type 2 diabetes at exactly that age. And I was pretty wary of the fact that I didn't want to go down that track because I saw what it did to him. I was overweight, borderline obese, like many sort of middle-aged men, and I consider 60 middle-aged. I used to think it was elderly, but now I think it's middle-aged. Like many middle-aged men, I'd probably put on 0.5 kilogram a year for 30 years. Just gradually getting a little bit thicker around the girt to the point where my kids are starting to poke me in the guts and say, come on, Dad. And I'd shrug my shoulders and say, well, hang on a minute, I'm on the right diet. I'm on a low-fat, diet, and I exercise and I do everything right. I still kept getting fatter. I'd also had some blood tests that weren't great. I had a fatty liver. I'd had that for 10 years. Every blood test I'd had, would come back saying, consistent with fatty liver. I didn't really understand what a fatty liver was. I figured I was on a low-fat diet. And like most doctors, I just ignored it. And I had high triglycerides and high insulin and so on. So the reality is I wasn't probably quite as healthy as I could have been. And in retrospect, I was clearly pre-diabetic. I mean, fatty liver disease is pretty well recognised as a precursor to diabetes. And I have no doubt that had I continued on in that way, I'd be a fully fledged diabetic, like my father was. So in 2012, I'm an old friend of Tim Noakes. No doubt that name resonates with you. Tim's a sports scientist, very highly regarded, and Tim and I have been friends for probably 30 years. We're on the sort of speaking circuit together, and pop up at conferences and usually get involved in big discussions about cricket or rugby or something. But Tim's a super smart guy, and around that time he started talking about the fact that he felt maybe we were wrong. That we'd been had this focus on fat, and that actually it was carbohydrates that were the problem. And he had his own experience where he had developed type 2 diabetes despite a supposedly very healthy diet and running lots of marathons and ultra marathons and so on. And he'd changed his diet and immediately had a massive impact on his health. And I thought, oh, gee, that's weird. Tim's had some weird ideas over the years, most of which have been proven right. But I thought, no, he's finally, lost the plot this time. he's really lost it. And but it didn't, and as I said, I admire his intellect. So it made me sort of explore things a little bit. And I bought Gary Taubes's book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. And this book just blew me away. I mean, I just could not believe what I was reading. It because not only did it talk about the relative merits of fats and carbohydrates, but it talked about the politics of how it all sort of happened, how the low fat movement sort of won out over the low sugar movement back in the 60s and 70s and so on. And I remember I'd put this book down at night and I'd sort of say, nah, this couldn't be right. Like, this couldn't be right. We couldn't. The whole of Western society couldn't have had this nutrition thing wrong for the last 40 years. That couldn't happen. And the more I read, the more I thought, Jesus, I mean, I think there's something in this. And so I dived into everything I could get my hands on, every article, every book, and every video. And the more I looked, the more I realised, there's something to this. We've actually had this thing wrong. So I thought, now I'm a scientist, okay? So I need to do some science and do some research into this. But as a scientist, I also knew that research with an n equals 1 is a waste of time, except when the 1 is you, in which case, it becomes very important. So I decided it was time for an n equals 1 experiment. So I put myself on a low-carb, healthy fat diet for 3 months. So day 1, I got all my bloods done, weighed myself, everything like that. Went on this pretty, reasonably strict low-carb, healthy fat diet. Sort of probably in retrospect would be a ketogenic diet. It didn't talk about keto much in those days, but it was, so it was, no processed food, no sugar, no starches, no pasta, rice, bread, potato, all that usual stuff. And basically replace that with real food. Probably went back to the way my grandparents would have eaten, just meat and fish and eggs, and we've been told for years we shouldn't have eggs, all that cholesterol and full fat dairy and, all that, butter instead of margarine and so on. And lots of green veg and cut back on fruit, just only had berries, nuts, seeds, olive oil, that sort of stuff. So that 3 months was just amazing. I lost 13 kilograms in 13 weeks. Wow. The weight just sort of poured off me without never being hungry. I stopped being hungry. So instead of eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day, I just went down to 2 meals a day, and I'd have a handful of nuts in the middle of the day, and so stopped being hungry, lost weight, had more energy, slept better, stopped snoring, ran better, concentrated better. It was amazing. If you told me all those things could happen by just changing your diet, I'd have laughed in your face.
Yeah. Honestly. Did you find that are you arming yourself with the information, reading and researching as best you could, and then when you were ready to dive in with the case study, I guess.
Yep.
Did you find that transition fairly easy? Because the way I see adhering to a healthy lifestyle, you need to understand first of all the principles and the foundation, but then you have to contend with what I call the intangibles, which is your cravings, your perhaps addictions, habits, all those sort of intangible things that can kind of interfere with the adherence long term. So did you have to wrestle with some of that, like the natural?
Yeah, I didn't have cravings so much, but what I did have, I just was hard to get my head around the fact that it was okay to eat fat.
Yeah.
I've been in a generation where for 30 or 40 years we've been told fat was bad. I remember going on a Pritikin diet, no fat at all, like 30, 40 years ago, so I guess I've always been interested in diet. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that was the hardest thing, that you could actually have, eggs. You didn't have to trim the fat off your meat. You could have as many eggs as you liked. You could have butter instead of margarine, and full fat cream and full fat milk rather than, skim milk and all this sort of stuff. That was hard to get my head around. And you've been told something's right for 30 years. It's not easy just to sort of toss all that out the window. Yeah. So then at the end of that 3 months, as I said, I lost 13 kilograms. My blood tests were amazing. I mean, my fatty liver that I'd had for 10 years completely resolved, absolutely back to normal. My triglycerides came down by half. My insulin came down to normal. All these things sort of happened. It was quite amazing. The one negative was I had to get a new wardrobe. All my trousers sort of, been sitting out here and stuff. Anyway, I figured that was a small price to pay. So I guess once I, had that personal experience on top of all the reading I've been doing, I thought, this is the way it is. We actually have got this wrong. So I guess when you have a discovery like that, you've got two choices. You either just sit on it yourself and say, have a little smile on your face and say, well, I'm right.
Yeah.
Or you sort of feel as though you have a bit of an obligation to tell the world about your experiences. And that was me. I sort of thought, I just can't keep this to myself. I mean, I've made this discovery. I know I wasn't the first person, obviously, to make the discovery, but, I thought, well, I can influence, some people, hopefully. So I started talking about it, writing about it, every opportunity I had. Well, for a start, people would talk to me because they'd see I lost all this weight. Say, Jesus, what have you done? And I think half of them thought I had cancer or something. Because all of a sudden I was half the man I used to be. But so people ask you, and then they get curious, and you start talking, and you start becoming an advocate for it. And so I became very passionate. I continued to read everything I could get my hands on. I still do, probably an hour or two every day, just new articles and new books. And, I've got a million books and, so on, half of which I haven't got around to reading. But there's this great keto diet cookbook that I've got here. So then about 3 years ago, I was chatting to some people and we were bemoaning the fact that everyone was very confused about diet. There were all these different diets out there, and for years we thought we knew what we should be eating, and now there was, paleo and Atkins and Mediterranean and low carb, and lots of people be saying to me, well, I'm just confused about what I should be eating. So I sort of made this sort of off the cuff suggestion that maybe we should just focus on one thing and get that right, and the obvious thing to focus on was sugar. Because that's the one thing that everyone agrees on. Even the dietitians agree on sugar, so that must be obvious. And so we set up. I sort of talked about setting up a campaign to reduce sugar, and people said, "Yeah, great idea." And I went around the country and spoke to a whole bunch of people who were in that sort of sphere, and everyone said, "Well, yeah, good idea." So we set up a charity campaign called Sugar by Half 3 or 4 years ago, and as you would know, because you were good enough to come to our launch, our Facebook Live launch, Scott, which we appreciated. Our aim is to reduce the amount of added sugar by 50%. So I always think campaigns should have an aim. So for Sugar by Half, the average Australian has probably 15, 16 teaspoons of added sugar a day. The World Health Organization recommends no more than 6. Maths was never my strong point, but that's roughly half. And if we can get down to that, so I firmly believe that if we were to, let's say in our wildest dreams, we were to be successful in getting that sugar intake down by half, I can't think of any other intervention in the country that would have as big an effect on people's health. So we're having a crack at that. We've been working hard on that for the last few years. We've got an education program going. We've got a corporate program. We've got a schools seeing, a sporting club seeing, and we're working on a diabetes program at the moment that we're pretty excited about, and we're going to launch at the end of the year. and we really want to have an impact on people with, especially with type 2 diabetes, but all chronic diseases really. And there's a lot of evidence now coming from the States and from the UK that you can actually put diabetes into remission with a low carb diet, and that's what we want to do. It's diabetes is a massive problem in this country.
Yeah, for sure. Have you engaged diabetes, the Association of Diabetes in Australia?
Well, they're a little bit difficult to do. We have spoken to them, and but they're very much wedded to big pharma and big food, and while they're prepared to acknowledge sugar, they're not prepared to acknowledge the effect that carbohydrates and starches have on blood sugars. And
it's on that side fairly recently, and it's actually astounding the recommendations. The recommendations they're making, it's almost like fueling diabetes rather than.
It's guaranteeing you'll have diabetes for life. I mean, you go on the record with the standard. I mean, that's the most bizarre thing. I mean, there are a lot of really smart people in medicine, but we disengage our brains sometimes. Now, when you think about what is diabetes, diabetes is an intolerance to carbohydrates. Okay, everyone agrees with that. Mm. So, what is the recommended diet for diabetes? A high carbohydrate diet. Mm. I mean, duh. As the kids would say. I mean, we'd be so obsessed about fat. Much of the obsession with fat and the dangers of fat, much of which is based on fraudulent science, really, that people have totally lost sight of the fact that it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
If you're not tolerant to something, don't have it.
Yeah.
If you're an alcoholic, don't have alcohol. If you've got celiac disease, don't have gluten. I mean, and yet we encourage diabetics to have high levels of carbohydrate. We say, "Oh, just take more medication or take more insulin." I mean, it is just insanity, and how people can't see that, it's beyond. I mean, look, and I was just as guilty for 30 years of my medical career. I was exactly the same, so I'm no better than anyone else. I just eventually woke up to it.
There's a governing body, which would probably be the first port of call for many people who get recently diagnosed pre-diabetic or full-blown diabetes. That would be right. Where do I need to go to? Where do I need to get a firmer understanding of what I've been diagnosed with? Mm. So it's just mind blowing, really. Is there evidence? Is there evidence that association does have interests in pharma, like?
Oh, well, yeah, look, I mean, I think, pharmaceutical companies, food companies, they're major sponsors of most of the medical organisations. So many of them are compromised. They'll deny it adamantly that they're compromised, but, of course they are. But also it's just that, we're very reluctant as a medical profession to change our mind on things, I mean, someone once said, 50% of everything you get taught in medical school turns out to be wrong. You just have to work out which 50%. And yet the majority of us stick to what we were taught in medical school as if it was gospel, because it's taught to us as gospel, and much of it is proven to be wrong. But we're very reluctant to change. And look, I get that. I mean, if you spent your life, you have 30, 40, 50 years of your career telling people one thing, and then all of a sudden some yobbo sports doctor comes and says, well, actually you're wrong. I mean, of course you're going to, react to that and be aggressive, defensive, and so on. But it's very sad, and the damage it's doing to people in this country and around the world. I mean, the diabetes. I mean, okay, we're worried about coronavirus epidemic, and there's a few million people with it around the world. I mean, there's 450 million people with type 2 diabetes in the world. Now, are we going to shut down the country to solve that problem? Kills a lot more people than coronavirus does, and yet we completely ignore it. In fact, we fuel it by giving the wrong advice. It's just so frustrating, and it just gets me very, very angry, as you can probably tell.
Well, it's the wrong advice, and couple that with the landscape that we live in. You go to your local cafe, you go to your service station, your airport. Your local restaurant, it's a high carbohydrate landscape.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's a lot to contend with. I just wonder whether when you started flying the flag, after your own personal case study and reading what you read, and you started being the advocate for a lower carb, higher fat diet, assuming, this was a few years ago, did you experience a bit of pushback from the community?
Yeah, I did. Some of my medical colleagues stopped talking to me. Excuse me. But look, not as much as some other people have.
Like your friends?
Yeah, I mean, like, people like Gary Fettke and so on, who have obviously been crucified for their position, really. It just shows you how sad the whole situation is. That people are just clinging to their long-held beliefs and trying to take down people who challenge those beliefs. I mean, we're supposed to be taught in medicine to sort of to think about things and to constantly be challenging new ways of doing, or better ways of doing things and so on. And yet there's this reaction to take down anyone who challenges. And there's a lot, as there's a lot of good scientific evidence to show that a low carb diet is preferable to a low fat diet. And yet, even the people who do the guidelines refuse to even look at that issue. It's very sad, and it's really held back the country and the health of the country. And but they're very powerful enemies. You go to the government and say, well, we need to change the diet, and the government says, well, all my medical people tell me that it's okay, and all my dietitian people tell me it's okay, and you think, well, what chance you got?
There's still lag, isn't there? I think. You've got the innovators, you've got the people at the pointy end of the arrow that make change and sort of probably get a bit of pushback in that initial phase. But, those sort of institutions, the government, the governing bodies will probably come to the party, but it might be 5, 10, 15 years down the track.
I'm sure that the dietitians will tell us all along that they've been in favour of a low carb diet, naturally. So, no doubt.
Yeah. I'm also interested because, and this comes from I guess, me personally, I was sort of entrenched. I was knee deep in that paleo movement, and so part of that was this abolition of certain food groups. I'm sure you're aware of that. One of those being dairy. And although I don't sort of talk about paleo anymore, it's about, to your point, about real food, whole foods. I still, when I speak to most of my clients, it's keeping dairy to a minimum. I personally have butter and ghee and the occasional goat's feta or sheep's. And so when I post about a recipe, I'll never include dairy other than butter and ghee, because to me there's all these caveats, and you don't always get the opportunity to speak about those caveats in an Instagram post, let's say. Not all dairy's created equally, and depends where your starting point is in health as to whether it's a good thing for you or not. Yep. So I'm interested to hear your stance on dairy, actually.
Well, the first thing is there's no one diet for everyone. I think, we're all different, and we all have different things that agree with us and don't agree with us. I think there is a significant number of people that dairy doesn't agree with. There's the lactose intolerant people. There's the people who have a dairy sort of sensitivity, if you like, to one of the dairy proteins. So that's a reasonable number of people who tell you, since they were a kid, they've never really been comfortable with dairy. On the other hand, I think, if you tolerate dairy quite well, I don't have a problem with dairy at all. I mean, I have full fat milk and yogurt, some cream, some butter, cheese. They're not massive amounts, but I'll have it as a normal sort of amount, and I seem to be able to tolerate that okay. And it certainly doesn't worry me from a saturated fat point of view or a cholesterol point of view. I think it's been shown very clearly over the last few years that dairy intake is actually associated with improved health rather than negative health. All the studies tend to point that direction. So I think it's really an individual thing, a personal thing. I mean, it's the same way with with nightshade vegetables or lectins or, these sort of things. I mean, there are, even with gluten. I mean, not that I have really any gluten, but, I think there are some people who are particularly sensitive to certain foods, and we're all different, and you've got to find your own thing. And I don't sort of push one particular diet, a paleo or an Atkins or a this or that. I mean, like you, I mean, I think the reason they're all successful is that they're basically removing processed food and replacing it with real food. And the actual sort of minor variations on that are probably not that important. They're right for you, but the principle is if you can get rid of processed food and replace it with real food, by definition, you reduce the amount of carbs, you reduce your vegetable oils and your sugars and your processed carbs, and you replace them with real food, then you can't go wrong. Really. And that's why I think all those diets work. I'm not going to say that paleo is better than Atkins, is better than Mediterranean. I mean, because it depends on a whole bunch of things, and it also depends on how what your metabolic health is like. We're all on a spectrum. I mean, there's one end, there's your type 2 diabetes, or you're morbidly obese or whatever, and they've probably got to be on the tough end of the spectrum, down to virtually no carbs and get their metabolism under control. Yeah. But then if you're 20 years old, healthy, fit, young, insulin sensitive, you can have probably 120 grams of carbs and be fine. But no one should be having the 300 grams of carbs that most Australians are having at the moment.
Yeah. I think that's probably why people are getting such great results on the carnivore diet.
Exactly.
Because your food group eliminates immediately all those sort of processed foods and high carbohydrates. And so people make the leap that it's the protein, it's the animal that's doing me good. And it's like, well, yes, but it's also the negative space in terms of what you're not eating, which is probably where the gold is, really.
Yeah, I mean, carnivore diet is really an old-fashioned elimination diet, which we when people had food allergies, we'd put them on this elimination diet, take everything out of it and put them on basics, and then gradually reintroduce things. And that's what I encourage people to do if they want to go on a carnivore diet. I mean, to be honest, when I first heard about carnivore diet, I said, well, no, that's ridiculous. I mean, there's all these, they'll be vitamin C deficient and all these sort of different things. And yet, the more I look into it, there are obviously a lot of people out there doing really, really well on a carnivore diet. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And especially those with autoimmune disease and significant sort of chronic metabolic health issues many of them, not all, but many of them seem to thrive on a carnivore diet. And really, if you'd told me that a few years ago, I'd have said no way. But the proof's in the pudding. And people have been on it long enough now to know there's no long-term consequence to the carnivore diet. So I'll often encourage people who've tried different sort of things to try a carnivore diet, particularly those with significant autoimmune issues. And usually they'll get significant help from that. And then, I say, well, if you want to try introducing, some green veg or something, just see how you go. And some of them will, be on a modified or carnivore-ish diet, as someone described it, and others will go back to hardcore carnivore. And again, some carnivores have dairy, some have fish, some have, so there's a lot of variation. And I think you've got to find what's right for you. I'm convinced there's a diet out there that's right for everyone. Yeah. And it's a matter of finding it. It's generally going to be low carb, real food, but the exact dimensions of it are variable.
Yeah. It's got to work for you. Else if the parameters are too firm and they don't work to your lifestyle, then it's going to be a short-lived exercise, really.
Yeah, it's got to be sustainable. I mean, it's all very well. I mean, we can tell everyone to get on an 800 calorie a day diet and they'll lose weight and they'll have a lot of good things happen to them. But, as we know, it's just not sustainable. So, the attractive thing about sort of the low carb sort of stuff is that it's sustainable because you can eat really well and really enjoy your food. I mean, I love my food, and I want to enjoy every meal that I have, and I do. And I can do that on a low carb. I don't think I could do that on an 800 calorie a day diet. I'd be hungry, hungry and angry. I wouldn't be nice to live with.
But I think this movement or the campaign or the charity, the Sugar by Half, is a really smart approach, because there's just so much confusion within that diet world. You know, we've spoken about paleo and low carb and carnivore just in the last 5 minutes, and so I always think about this person who, for whatever reason, maybe they've just got a health scare and been told to watch their health, so they Google best diet for weight loss or for health or even exercise plan for that matter. And the amount of information they'd be bombarded with, some of it conflicting, some of it complementing, you just wouldn't know where to start. But the one thing that we can all agree on is the sugar thing, and how sugar has infiltrated our landscape. But again, it comes down to, and it's easy to understand, you can wrap your head around the sugar by half thing. But then I guess it's dealing with those intangible factors, the cravings, the hormonal dialogue that's going on, that's sort of counterintuitive almost to the diet that you're on, because your hormones, your physiology is urging you to reach out for that sugary snack, whatever it is. And so, there's definitely that. But I think it's a smart move. I think it's an easy.
It's also all the hidden sugars around, that people are just not aware of. I mean, we all get, putting 2 spoons of sugar in our coffee, and most people get the soft drink sort of thing. And but we grew up thinking that fruit juice was healthy, and yet it's basically sugar and water. They take all the good stuff out of the fruit and leave the sugar and water.
Yeah.
We grew up thinking that sports drinks were healthy, and again, just sugar and water. We grew up thinking that flavored yogurts were healthy, full of sugar. Muesli bars, all these sort of things that, tomato sauce and barbecue sauce, they're healthy, yet full of sugar. So, I think a lot of it is awareness of where sugar is. I mean, clearly sugary drinks are the biggest single factor, especially among young people. But, pretty much every processed food has sugar in it, And
do you see much change coming from top down? So bottom up is you and I talking about this to our clients and our community and helping people gain awareness of where these sugars are. But I feel like those big manufacturers, big producers, the Nestle's of this world, the Kellogg's, through my lens, they should have a greater duty of care. Because
their only duty is to their shareholders.
Yeah,
that's the business world.
So you don't have an optimistic view that if there's enough dialogue from the ground up, enough people talking about this low sugar, the negative health implications of eating sugar, that message won't seep into their.
Oh, they will respond commercially, because they'll see, there's some money in low sugar products here, so they'll promote the fact that they're. But there's a lot of parallels with the tobacco campaign. And what did it take? 40 years from the time that people started showing that tobacco was harmful, and the tobacco industry fought that and denied that and obscured that fact. And the food industry acts in exactly the same way and has the same motivation. It's just money. So, until there's such demand from below, as you say, from people who are finding out about this, learning, the hard way, what the right way to eat is, then eventually the food manufacturers will respond. In the same way that when we told them to take fat out of food, 40 years ago, they responded and everything was low fat, Problem was they replaced it with sugar, but, that's not their fault. We told them to take the fat out.
Yeah.
And there'll come a point where it'll be commercially advantageous to have a whole bunch of low sugar, low carbohydrate foods. But we haven't got to that point yet. I think the first manufacturer that really takes that on will do very well. But it's disappointing it hasn't happened yet, because they're doing very nicely at the moment. Thank you very much. So why would they change?
Yeah, that's right. So what's on the agenda next for Sugar by Half, Peter?
Well, as I said, we're really working on this diabetes program. There are a couple of programs both in the UK and the US that have been very successful in reversing up to 50% of cases of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and in the other 50%, reducing their medication and their need for insulin and so on. So it's been shown very clearly that a low carb program works. So we're really working hard on developing an app and a website with massive amount of resources that will just make it very easy for people who want to make that sort of change, to take them on that journey. And that's going to be ready by the end of this year. November, we're hoping to release that. And I think that's going to be really exciting. And because a lot of people sort of say to me, well, where can I go? What can I look, and there's obviously lots of books around and so on. But, a program that will take them through the journey, I think is really important. And then we continue to, we're working with education people to develop classes for schools. So school teachers can have access through Cool Australia to a whole bunch of very clever lessons on sugar and shopping and working out how much sugar's in things. And they're very, very clever the way they go about it. We have a corporate program that's sort of ready to go called Hit Sugar for Six, drawing on my cricket background. And companies, it's all been on hold now, obviously because of COVID. But that was all ready to go. We had our first one in place there, so we're hoping to develop that. So lots of things. Obviously, we don't have a lot of funding, and we get by people putting a lot of time and effort into it. But hopefully we'll have an impact, and that's what we all want to do. We all want to have an impact and make a difference, and that's what I'm certainly focused on doing for the rest of my time. And I'm sure it's the same with you, Scott. You sort of you feel as though you bash your head against a brick wall, and then you get an email, as you do every couple of days, saying, I had this and I had that, and I was in the coffee queue at university recently. A girl came up to me and said, "Oh, Dr. Brukner," and I said, "Yeah." And she said, I enjoyed your lecture. I said, "Oh, that's good, And she said, "Oh, but that's not what I want to talk to you about." I said, "Oh God, what have I done here?" And she said, "My husband and I are massive cricket fans, and because of you, back in 2014, we changed our diet. And my husband's been bipolar all his life, and he's now off all medication. And you've changed our life. You've changed our lives, and I just want to say thank you."
Amazing.
And you think, whoa, no one ever said that about me fixing their ankle or their knee or anything like that. So, and then every couple of days you get someone who contacts you and says they've read your book or heard your YouTube lecture or something like that. So, that makes it, it makes you feel, well, maybe what we're doing is not a waste of time after all. And I'm sure you have exactly the same experience yourself, Scott.
For sure. I mean, sometimes it's a bit of an echo chamber. It's, me talking to someone like you, and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you put something out into the universe and you don't get anything back. But every now and again, you hear from a client or someone that you don't know from a bar of soap who expresses gratitude because they've had, our advice has helped them in various different ways. So that's enough to keep you going. I think it's enough to put fuel in the belly and
exactly. And that, this makes a difference. I mean, there's nothing else that I could do in medicine. No drug, nothing I could do that would make as big a difference as this. And so it's a no-brainer for me that I'll do everything I can to get this message out there.
Yeah, good on you, Peter. Peter, I would just love to leave with, let's go back to that person that I described a second ago who's just got a health scare. Let's say it's a lady in her mid-40s, never done exercise, never followed a health plan of any description, but she needs to lose weight, she needs to get healthy. What would be your 3 starting points for her?
Well, I would get her to open up her pantry, get a big garbage bag, and just sweep out everything that's in a packet or a can or and so on, and go down to the supermarket or the shopping centre and just fill her shopping basket with fresh food, with real food. I think the old story of sticking to the outside of the supermarket, not the middle aisles, because all the good stuff's on the outside and so on. So I think real food rather than processed food. If there's just one single message, it's jerf. JERF, just eat real food. And that, by itself makes a massive difference. Now, that's not easy because, where the advertising and the promotion and everything, it's very difficult to do that. But that's
the cost too is also
absolutely. But you can eat, real food on a budget. There's no doubt about it. Sure, if you want to eat cheaply, you just go to Macca's every night or something like that. But if you're smart the way you go about eating, vegetables and berries in season, and you don't have to have fillet steak every night. You can have different cuts of meat and so on. So, there's definitely and you're smart the way you cook, and you can cook for a week. Do all your cooking on the weekend, do your shopping. Go to the market when it's about to close and get all the bargains. There's lots of ways you can do that. So I think that's a single most important thing. I think exercise is important, not so much for weight loss. I think weight loss is largely diet, particularly in men. In women, there's probably more of a role for exercise, my gut feel. In men, I'd say diet is 90% of weight loss and exercise 10%. Whereas women, it's I don't know, maybe 60 or 70% diet and more exercise. So, but again,
explanation to that discrepancy, or?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, I'm sure you would agree, Scott, that every single male that you put on a low carb diet loses weight. You really never have a failure. And very easily, usually. Half to a kilogram a week every week that they're on the diet. Till they get back to normal. Women, not nearly as consistent. They won't. Some of them will do exactly the same, but some will lose half that amount. I mean, when I went on my diet, for that 13 weeks, my wife did the same thing. She lost half what I ate. Pissed her off. I had to stop telling her how much weight I was losing because she was getting more and more pissed off, and I don't blame her. No, I know. Yeah, happy wife, happy life. Anyway, but exercise has got a lot of other benefits, as well as weight loss, and for people with diabetes or chronic disease, exercise is a really important thing. So I think that's the number two. Obviously diet is number one by a long way. Get that right, and you're pretty much there. But exercise is important, and then the S's. I'll make an equal third. So sleep, stress, and sun. Okay, really important to get good sleep. And interestingly, if you stop eating crap, you sleep a lot better. It's amazing the difference it made to my sleep. And I stopped snoring. I used to have a lot of trouble with snoring and sleep apnea and so on. Completely went away as soon as I went on this diet and lost the weight. So sleep's important. Stress, I think, really important. Hard to lose weight when you're stressed, and just generally hard to resolve your metabolic issues. And sun, I think sun is really underrated. Get out in the sun as much as you possibly can. Don't get burnt, but we've gone way too far the other way with this obsession about covering up and so on, and to the point now where we just don't get enough vitamin D and nitric oxide and all the good things that sun. So I try and get out whenever the sun comes out, which at this time of the year in Melbourne is not that often, but certainly, try and get out in the sun as much as possible. So, so diet, exercise, and then the 3 S's.
Beautiful.
It's a cheat way of giving you 5 rather than 3.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I know you're a very busy man, a man with an incredible past and lots of letters after your name. So I really appreciate your time and your energy.
No, thank you very much, and keep up, the good work. I mean, I love your books and your recipes and the job you're doing. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Peter. That's very kind of you to say. All right, have a great day, Peter. Stay safe.
All right, thanks, Scott. Terrific.